acquisition almost happen every day in the workplace. People may ask a question about why do companies keep acquiring other companies, or why companies want to be acquired. Today, our team, Shravya, Kristen, Dipti, will analyze the Loxo Oncology's acquisition by Eli Lilly and then explore the rationale behind the strategic move. Loxo Oncology is a biopharmaceutical company specializing in genetic defined disease. The company was founded in 2013 and headquartered in New York with the mission of discovering and developing drugs to help people living with cancer. The company went to public in 2014. From the table on the right, you can see they fundraised over 500 million over 6 rounds, and almost 90% of the fundraising was happened after the IPO. So in 2018, Loxo has 4 drugs in the pipeline and one received FDA approved. Noticeably, Loxo 292 is a optimistic drug as a first-in-class drug because the clinical data shows this drug has a very high response rate to few different types of cancer. The management team was actively looking for the first class in the world in this industry to collaborate and deliver drugs to patients as quickly and efficiently as possible. Based on the SEC finding, Loxo reached out to more than 15 licensing complaints, but Loxo wasn't pleased because the term they offered wasn't good enough for them. So let's take a look at Eli Lilly. Eli Lilly is a global healthcare leader that creates medicines, make people's life better around the world. The company was founded in 1876 and headquartered in Indianapolis. The footprint of Lilly across over 100 countries around the world, and the Lilly Oncology is targeting tumor dependencies and genetic defined cancers. Based on the Wall Street revenue forecast for 2019, most of the company's optimism was driven by its oncology portfolio. By then, Lilly has very notable breast cancer drugs in the market, but it was facing severe fight for the market share with other healthcare companies such as Pfizer. At the same time, Lilly has one of the most profitable ED drug that fell patent cliff in 2018, which will significantly affect the company's profit in the coming years. Lilly is looking for an opportunity to fill the patent gap and also to find some drugs to fill in its oncology portfolio.
So now, given all of this information, what should Loxo do? Should they accept this acquisition offer from Lilly? So to go further into this decision making, we decided to analyze the situation using the following tools. First, we're going to look at the licensing versus acquisition tool, which we made our own from the outsourcing versus vertical integration tool, followed by the 4 Eyes deal structure analysis, and finally, the 4 types of integration and which integration method would be the best based off the post-merger integration tool. So, Loxo's strategic decision. Should they go for licensing or should they take up this acquisition deal from Lilly? As you can see, just based off of first glance, acquisition is the way to go from this chart. And to go more in depth to why acquisition is the better path, when it comes to drug discovery and making sure a drug gets into the market, FDA regulation is heavily involved in this process. And so whether Loxo decides to go for the acquisition and be acquired by Lilly or be on their own, they have to comply to FDA regulations when it comes to clinical trials, R&D, or preclinical trials as well. And therefore, we found that moving forward with the acquisition when it comes to this aspect of just drug discovery made sense because it would be more cost efficient. And since Lilly is also an established brand in the drug discovery world, they would also be able to help Loxo achieve their goal in a less time frame. Additionally, drug discovery is a very highly competitive industry and timeliness is key. And for Loxo to try and independently build and develop their clinical and R&D on their own with no other company's help would be extremely time consuming and also resource consuming, and therefore that decision is not advisable. Additionally, licensing means that if a drug does really well, then they have the potential of losing out on several benefits um, of not owning the drug by themselves, and therefore licensing is not ideal. Finally, IP is also very tricky in this industry. Therefore, going the acquisition route means that there's less hassle when it comes to IP maintenance, and there's also less risk of fighting for IP issues in the future because Lilly is an established company, and therefore they can take care of that realm if they are acquired. So overall, when it comes to flexibility, Loxo does lose the flexibility of being their own independent company if they are acquired, but their core competence remains the same, and their IP is also protected, and therefore the acquisition is the best route to go.
We now focus on the deal analysis to figure out if Loxo is a good acquisition candidate for a big pharma like Lilly. So the first piece we're focusing on is infeasibility. There was little to no infeasibility because Loxo is a US-based company, and then they were only reaching out to US-based manufacturers for acquisition, so it would not trigger a government intervention. The second piece is information asymmetry. So since Loxo was working in the drug discovery market and was looking for acquirers from the same market, like Big Pharma, there was minimal information asymmetry. Loxo also had a drug that was approved by the FDA, signaling that they're doing very well. And then the third piece is Loxo also bought back their shares after they went public to signal that they're very strong as a company. Moving on to next slide. And then in terms of inflexibility, there was very little inflexibility because Loxo had laid out their timeline for when the product would get to the market. And there was very limited competition in this space for Loxo, mainly because they were working for a very niche drug, and then it was a very targeted market, which was very certain. So there was no problems with inflexibility. And then the last piece is indigestibility. So although this was minimal, and Loxo is a relatively small company, and a big company like Lilly would have no problem taking on such an acquisition, Loxo did have a very non-traditional work culture when compared to other industries in this space.
So as Deepti's analysis shows, acquisition makes the most sense, but you need to figure out what acquisition and what type of post-merger integration makes the most sense to make this acquisition successful. Because Loxo already has their value innovation, which is driven by their culture, as Deepti mentioned. So their small work environment allows them to have a collaborative culture that is non-competitive, and they risk losing that culture and thus their value innovation if they're fully integrated into a big pharmaceutical company. So they need to ensure that they have a low interdependence, so they retain that culture, while at the same time having a high autonomy to ensure that any decisions they make will allow them to go forward in any way possible without the bureaucracy of a big pharmaceutical company, which means that they would need a preservation integration, and they would need whoever is acquiring them to recognize that they're acquiring Loxo for their knowledge access, which means low integration, low replacement, but a slow post-merger integration strategy. Next slide. And so, what does Loxo look like in 2019? They're facing financial uncertainty. In 2017 and 2018, they have losses around of 150 million and around 50 million, with only $20,000 of revenue versus competitors of $60 billion in revenue and a net profit margin of around 20% that they can reinvest in R&D. And so even though Loxo right now has a competitive advantage, they may lose that without their capital or profitability. And they have one FDA drug approved, but they don't have any manufacturing or clinical capabilities, which means that they're not getting much revenue from that approved drug, and they can't find the licensing to be able to get more revenue from those drugs. Next slide. And so as the analysis shows, it doesn't make sense to do licensing deals. And while you can't do vertical integration either because they lack the capital, which leads them to this acquisition route. Next slide. And so that's in fact what happened. Loxo was acquired by Lilly with the intent that they would get more capital and more resources from Lilly while also trying to negotiate how to preserve that culture. Next slide. And so that is exactly what happened. Eli Lilly recognized that Loxo was trying to, that their value innovation was from their knowledge access. And so they made sure that Loxo was a subsidy of Lilly with a separate cancer drug discovery research to ensure that value innovation was still there and wasn't ruined by full integration. Next slide. And so in 2019, Eli Lilly acquired Loxo for around $8 billion with a 68% premium, which means that Loxo was able to maximize their own transaction gap, and also, because they were a subsidy, minimize the transition gap to get the most value for themselves as the acquired company. And if you have any questions about anything that happened in the acquisition process, please post on the discussion boards and we'd be happy to answer them.